Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Right. Should we be grateful to the members of political parties? They pay subscriptions that help keep the parties going. They trudge the streets trying to bring politics to your doorstep. They go to meetings to help shape party policy. And however much you may dislike politicians, you at least have to recognise that democracy requires functioning parties, even if it is only to give you something to complain about. So yes, we should be grateful to the activists. But at the same time, there is a problem. They now have the power to pick a Prime Minister, and yet they're not altogether representative of the population at large. And we can say that now because of a big survey of party members carried out by the Mile End Institute attached to Queen Mary University of London. You've seen party members in TV coverage of the party conferences, and maybe you can tell they're not typical. Average age of Conservatives is 57. The population at large is younger, average age 40. Labour is more surprising. You might have seen images of lots of young Corbyn-supporting Labour activists, but the party's membership actually has an average age not much different to the Tories, 53. But what about members' views? Well, as you'd expect, Labour and Tories are poles apart. They embody the divisions within the country. On same-sex marriage, for example, Conservatives are only 41% in favour, Labour 85%. The public are in the middle at about 66%. On the death penalty, most Tory members think it is the most appropriate sentence for some crimes, and fewer than a tenth of Labour voters do. National polls have put public support for the reinstatement of the death penalty at between 36% and 49%, depending on how you ask the question. Then, of course, there's Brexit. For example, should Britain stay in the single market? A quarter of Conservatives want to, the vast bulk of Labour members want to. As for the public at large, again polls vary as to the questions, but generally support for the single market is nearer 50%. You'd expect activists to be unrepresentative, particularly as there are so many fewer of them than there used to be. In the early 50s, the Tories boasted of having over 2 million members. Now it's probably fewer than 150,000, but they don't publish the figures anymore. But that select group has the potential power to select a Prime Minister. In 2016, for example, when David Cameron resigned, Tory members came close to having a say between Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom over who would lead the country. It would have been the first time party members had chosen a PM, and on the evidence of the poll, Tory members would have been closer to Andrea Leadsom. She, of course, dropped out of the race before members had a say. But the country is already very divided, and in order to unite us, politics probably needs to involve a subtle process of arbitration between conflicting values. The issue is thus whether so much power should be vested in a group who tend to strong opinions at the more extreme ends of the spectrum.
When I said there were fewer than 150,000 Tories, by the way, a lot of people think it's literally half that number, but as I say, they don't publish the figures. Well, Justin Fisher is a Professor of Political Science at Brunel University, London. Also with me, we have, live in the studio, two party members. Cherry Mostashar is co-chair of Momentum in Oxford, and Chloe Ahmed is a member of the Conservative Party. Very good evening to you. Why do you do it? I mean, come on, Cherry, why do you do it?
Well, I asked myself that on a very cold January evening, and when I'm standing at someone's door trying to persuade them to vote Labour when all they want to know is why Jeremy Corbyn wears a certain kind of shoe. So it does get soul-destroying sometimes, but I really believe that if you want a certain sort of world and you have a vision of how it can achieve that, you have to go out there and try and at least talk to people and tell them why you think they'd be better off.
What about you, Chloe? I mean, do you do it in the hope that you're going to influence the Conservative Party in some way as an individual member?
That, and you have to change anything, you have to be a part of it. You can't expect anything to change, and you can't expect your future to be a certain way if you don't put anything into it. You can't just sit back and say this is going to happen, or the world will be a certain way.
You're describing a sort of...
you can't expect anything to happen if you don't put anything into it.
You're half the age of the Conservative Party. You must go to meetings and be the sort of, like, literally the youngest person in the room by a mile, no?
Everybody, everybody says that, but no, we've formed, there's lots of young Conservative groups, we have a great young Conservative movement as such, and we go along to lots of the socials, lots of meetings, and no, I'm definitely not the only person.
And you're on the more liberal end, incidentally, more on the younger kind of demographic political views as well, because I think you would support Theresa May in favour of same-sex marriage and single market. And
yes.
I go to meetings and I'm the oldest.
Well, I was going to say,
how did this happen?
The fraud is we're always shown this young activist Labour Party. Your members are the same age as the Conservatives, virtually. 53 is against 57, the average age of Labour members.
There is a big influx of new young members, and they have more energy than activists have ever had. I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've never seen so many people that sort of say, we're going out, you coming? I guess I better go, because...
And it is fair, Labour do have 500,000 members, which is just puts them way different.
Incredible.
Let's talk to Professor Fisher. So, is it an issue that these people have too much power because they're unrepresentative of the rest of the public?
Well, if it is an issue, it's always been an issue. So we can go back to the start of the 20th century, and people were starting to question whether it was democratic that leaders were accountable to members rather than to the voters. So it's always been an issue. Labour, for example, kept the unions involved in policy making because they were scared of members being too extremist. The Conservatives kept the members out of the selection of candidates and leaders for many, many years. So it's not a new issue.
Right.
The interesting thing is, hitherto, it's always been a balancing act between voters, the leader, and the activists. But what we see in Labour at the moment is the leadership and the activists, at least the Momentum, Cherry's group, being much more aligned than usual. Right. But as we've seen in these data released today, the voters are still much more centrist.
Yeah.
I'm not a separate group. I organise under a banner called Momentum, it used to be the campaign to elect Jeremy Corbyn, and we had all these people enthused.
No, but it's set up to preserve his legacy in the Labour Party.
No, it's a leftist legacy.
Member number one, though, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did you campaign for Blair?
I did, but those were my salad days.
but Justin, so is it the case that parties that this is the crucial question, parties that have more activist or member power become more alienated from the voters?
Well, comparatively, that's tended to be the case. And it's tended to be the case with more left of centre...
So the left parties have the stronger members.
And that's largely been because the right of centre parties have been able to command things like finance from outside sources. Left of centre parties tend to be less well served financially. Now, Labour's had the benefit of unions in the past, but now we see that the Conservatives are a much more wealthy party. So it's a balancing act. Of course, you've got to give the members something back in return, but sometimes, as we've seen, democratic participation can be unpredictable.
Yeah. Chloe, what do you think of Momentum? Do you think of Momentum as a great democratic force? I mean, obviously, you don't agree with them on anything. We take that for granted. But do you see it as a good thing, engaging people, or do you think it's a threat to democracy?
engage people? Yes, definitely. I think it's a good thing for every political party to be able to engage with the general public and with everybody, but what Momentum has become, do I agree with it? No.
What has it become?
Online, within social media, Momentum has become a kind of a platform for people to abuse.
I don't want to get too much into it.
Can I just say there is no such thing as Momentum, as we are disparate.
It's leaderless.
We're leaderless.
There's no one to answer to, so it's kind of there's no control over.
I don't like everything. But what I want to ask you is, would you consider it democratic? Would you have considered it democratic in 2016 if Tory members had picked Andrea Leadsom as our Prime Minister? We voted for David Cameron in the general election, then he resigns and the membership get to pick the Prime Minister. Does that feel to you democratic.
Well, I mean, we have to look at the whole system. A lot of it isn't democratic.
But you're happy with that because you believe in members and
I believe
power.
that members, and especially now with the growing number of members of the Labour Party and the way that we're actually going out and talking to people.
Yeah, but are you happy would you be happy with Tory members picking our Prime Minister? Of course you're happy with Labour members picking the Prime Minister. What about Tory members? Because it's all part of the same deal.
You can't be okay with one party and not the other.
I mean, it's like saying, yeah, I would like to choose, that we weren't going out of Europe. I would like to choose all those things, but I can't.
Why on earth not? When Blair resigned as leader, the Labour members had the opportunity to elect a new leader. Now, as it turned out, it was the same kind of one-member election that we had in the Conservative Party. But it's no different if it's the Conservative Party or the Labour Party.
But the members, the MPs... are accountable to their voters, aren't they?
Yes.
And so it always used to be, until relatively recently, that the MPs chose the leader and thus chose the Prime Minister. And now, basically, the MPs might have foisted upon them someone who they don't particularly want as their leader.
And that is always a danger. And indeed, we saw that with the Conservative Party when Ian Duncan Smith was elected. So sometimes you can make unpredictable decisions. But what you've got to remember is that the parties have got to give members something to keep them involved. Cherry and Chloe here do all the wonderful things that party members do, campaigning and so on and so forth. But what's the incentive for someone to get involved if they don't get a say? And it's a real balancing act for parties.
Well, and it's extending it.
You wouldn't have parties. You wouldn't have anything.
Absolutely.
And also, having members choose the leadership, whatever party, is more democratic. It's about...
Better than the MPs, you think?
Absolutely, because they're a small group. They can be, deals can be stitched up between them. They think about, their promotions.
But they're accountable to the voters in the way that the activists aren't.
Are they really?
More balanced views of asking members. In the end of the day, OK, we're members of a Conservative Party, but anybody can be a member of a Conservative Party, a political party.
They can
you
join.
Don't know anybody can join. There's no kind of...
Well, as Justin says, this argument's been raging since 1902, so we'll won't probably resolve it right now.
But we're trying to make politics that reflects the people.
Thanks all very much indeed.